We've yes, thank you. Let's get started. We've reached noon. Welcome to our 6th webinar as part of our 2020, now 2021 virtual Discovery Farms Conference. The theme of our Discovery Farms Conference this year has been keeping up with your conservation goals through change and challenge. The series is brought to you by the Discovery Farms programs in Minnesota and Wisconsin and the many organizations that support these programs. If you haven't heard of Discovery Farms before, Discovery Farms is a water quality research and educational program that focuses on the intersection of agriculture and water quality and stresses the importance of farmer leadership. Also, why webinars? Just because we usually have an annual meeting in Wisconsin and have started doing that in Minnesota as well. And in lieu of not being able to meet in person this year, we decided on doing a webinar series. After today, there will be one more webinar left next week, same time, same place. There will also be CCA continuing education credits at the end. We will show a QR code if you're a CCA and needing those credits. Please scan the QR code. If you don't have the ability to scan the code, please enter your name and CCA number at the end of the meeting today, and we will collect those and send those in. So how today will work. If not done so already, please mute your mics and cameras, except for our speakers and during their turns, of course. Questions will be taken via the chat box. Please feel free to type in your questions, and we'll get those answered by the speakers live. This presentation is recorded and will be put on Facebook Live and YouTube, so it is essential that we don't have folks talking over one another and sharing screens. Please use the chat box. All right, so for today, we had representatives from Minnesota and Wisconsin that will share the latest tools that help farmers spread manure safely and appropriately according to current standards and guidelines. Regulations vary by county, so it's important to learn where to look when manure decisions are being made. So first up, we have Dustin Goering from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration to talk a little bit about their runoff risk advisory tools that they have been developing for a number of years, started in Wisconsin and have since moved to Minnesota and other states throughout the upper Midwest. So with that, let's welcome Dustin.
All right, thanks, Tim. Let me share my screen here real quick. Jump into it. All right. So you guys see everything now?
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for letting me talk to you guys about this these regional tools we've been developing over the last, I guess it's been over 10 years now across the region. And I also appreciate this opportunity to talk to a lot of people that normally don't get to introduce this topic to. So I'm curious to hear a lot of comments and questions to help direct some improvement going forward with these tools. All right, so just to set the stage, obviously, this isn't anything new, but the widespread impacts of excess nutrients off the landscape is impacting water bodies both locally and up the regional. And so there's obviously a lot of conservation practices ongoing. And this tool and these efforts are a little bit of a way that NOAA and the National Weather Service can help provide some benefit to this issue. Okay, so jumping straight to what are these runoff risk tools? Well, first of all, they're a great success story of state and federal partnerships, something that's pretty unique to the Weather Service in general. But how this works is that real-time National Weather Service modeling is done in our office every day. We post-process that data and package it up and provide it to the states who have built and maintained their websites for these tools. And they provide this information to users in their area for free with the goal that producers and farmers would monitor this tool and be able to schedule their field work or nutrient applications from today out through the next 7 to 10 days with the goal of avoiding doing that work, if possible, right before a runoff event would occur. So kind of boils down to the challenge here, again, mostly centered on nutrient applications, which generally happen during the busiest time of the years. It could generally, field conditions probably could be poor, and the weather's dynamic. It could be changing. The forecast could be changing a lot, and you're dealing with a lot. So the reality is that tomorrow or the next couple of days may or may not be the best day to get out there and apply nutrients due to this runoff potential. And so the goal here is that this tool would help with those 1 to 7 day kind of decisions for the farmers and producers to alert them of this possibility of the conditions getting bad, and then obviously freshly applied nutrients being lost off the fields. So we're looking to kind of delay or divert to a safer field if possible and reduce that acute loss of freshly applied nutrients. That's where we're trying to make the benefit. Alert them of the possibility of
Dustin,
the conditions getting bad, and then obviously freshly applied nutrients being lost off the fields.
Can you hear me, Dustin?
We're looking to kind of delay, revert to a safer field.
I'm not sure what's going on, but it sounds like your
acute loss of freshly applied nutrients. That's where we're trying to make the benefit.
Previous comments are being Dustin restated. I don't know if anybody else can hear that. Erica, can you hear that? Can you hear me, Dustin?
I can hear it, Tim.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear the echo myself still going.
Do you want to quit sharing your screen, Dustin? See if that would help.
Is someone screaming in the background from Facebook with the delay?
Can you hear me, Dustin?
I can hear it, Tim.
Yeah, I hear the echo myself still going.
Do you want to?
Okay. So I'm not sure if I
Tim,
pause that.
I think it's coming from you. When I mute you, we don't hear it.
From who? From me?
From Tim.
Oh, okay.
You can keep going, Dustin. I think you sound good on my end.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened, but
okay.
I don't hear it now.
Okay. I'll just sorry about that. I'll just jump back in where we were.
Yeah, nothing like technology to really make this exciting.
All right. I gotta find my mouse now again. All right. So where were we? Let's see. I think we're on this slide here. I'll just jump back. So we don't want to apply nutrients before runoff could occur. That's basically where we were. This tool is to help identify those future conditions. And let's see. So this tool is just another tool in the toolbox for the states to kind of help meet these nutrient reduction goals they have. This is free to the user to use, and it's a fairly small cost to the states. And long term, what we're looking for is to promote the timing message and then encourage that adoption into day-to-day operations. And then also, there's a dual benefit possible with both the producer economic aspect and also an environmental aspect if this tool were to be used long term. Okay, so I just want to touch on some. So there's been edge of field data collected. Obviously, the Discovery Farms program has been a big leader in that over the last 10 to 20 years. And there's some findings from the data that have been pointed out that could kind of stress the importance or the benefit of using this type of approach going into the farming operations to reduce some of these nutrients. And there's about three important aspects I'd like to point out. The first, and that plot to the bottom right, is phosphorus loss over the year, and it's obviously we can see there's certain times of the year where day-to-day field operations and decisions to get out in those fields can impact water quality a lot more than other times of the year. So using a tool like this during those riskier times of the year is something that is potential benefit. The upper left plot I like because kind of highlights application timing and how I interpret this data. Again, all from Discovery Farms programs, but this is the sediment, phosphorus loss versus or yield versus sediment. And we see that linear relationship where if we losing that sediment in the soil off the fields, we're losing that phosphorus bound to it. like you would expect. And a lot of conservation practices are obviously applying to that type of relationship as they should. However, that little envelope there, or the circle, kind of identifies runoff events that don't correspond with that relationship, where they are losing more phosphorus than you would expect. And that's because these are dominated by dissolved phosphorus and attributed to runoff events shortly before runoff events, or I'm sorry, nutrient application shortly before runoff events. So I kind of use this as an example of these are what the events that runoff risk is really trying to push the benefit for. It's the more the timing dominated runoff events, or nutrient loss events, I should say. One final aspect of the edge of field data that that we kind of use is that when Discovery Farms, they took their runoff events, they racked and stacked them, and they found that the top 10% by magnitude contribute between 60–65% of the nutrient losses. So what we're trying to do is, if we have some skill to identify the future runoff events, they're larger events where we have high potential for losing nutrients, and we don't apply more nutrients before those events, then we have that potential benefit. And so that's why we kind of have geared the tool to really stress the largest events, because that's where the edge of field data shows us we have a very high likelihood of losing nutrients. So let's not add more and make the problem any worse. Okay, so that's kind of a little justification. So now we're going to how this all started and where we're going from now, or from here. So this actually started in Wisconsin, as Tim mentioned, back in the mid-2000s. There was a pretty bad year for fish kills and runoff events, and the state actually mandated their Department of Ag to come up with an online tool that producers and farmers could use to plan their activity a little bit better. So there were some meetings and everything like that happened, and then eventually the Weather Service got pulled in because we do real-time soil moisture and runoff modeling across the region. So out of that working group, we came up with version 1, which some of you may remember, and it's kind of using our operational river forecast model. It's large, irregular shaped basins. And it was mostly just a proof of concept. Could we provide a benefit to a brand new user base based on data we're already providing? So that's kind of where this started. And I guess I want to stress that this isn't just forecast precipitation for tomorrow. This is, as I mentioned, we're doing continuous soil moisture modeling and runoff. We're using a week's worth of precipitation, forecast precipitation, and forecast temperatures. We're handling snowpack and frozen ground conditions. And so what we do is we extract different types of output from that model every run, we post-process it, and we generate a grid cell or basin-specific risk that goes into this product that we hand off to the state. A few years ago, the GLRI caught wind of version 1 and asked us to kind of expand in the region. And so we took up that challenge, and then in doing so, we decided to move from that irregular shaped basin down to a smaller, finer gridded resolution. So every single grid cell is its own independent model that runs runoff and soil conditions. So we collected as much edge of field data as we could. Again, thanks to Discovery Farms for a big part of it. And we used that to kind of fine tune the algorithms to post-process the model data. So what that ended up with is what we would consider version 2 of the runoff risk tools. We currently have 4 of those running. So Minnesota and Wisconsin are 2 of them, and then Michigan and Ohio are the other 2 that are online now. And so each state is responsible for updating or building these websites. They all have a little different interactive ability or interactive ability to use them. But we try to stress consistency in the color schemes and verbiage as much as we can. And so a quick note, to get to any of these sites, that runoffrisk.info is a quick, just simple web page to get to these sites, so you don't have to remember any of the URLs for each state. So I wanted to take this opportunity to kind of walk through what these sites look like and how to maybe interpret them a little bit. So this is a screenshot from yesterday when I grabbed this from Minnesota. And you can see, so up across the tabs, up across the top, they have tabs for the risk, and then also other model input, such as precipitation, and then output, such as soil temperatures. And so you can see spatially how the risk would look across the state. Now, if this is during the summertime, you would only see the yellow, orange, and red for the different types of magnitude of risk that we would be showing. But what we do in the wintertime is we allow every grid cell to dynamically flip over to what we consider like a winter condition. And so based on every grid cell, if there's frozen ground or 1 inch of snow on the snow depth modeled, then it will turn that grid cell blue, just to kind of as an awareness factor, to let people know, obviously they probably already do know, but just as a visual reminder that, we're in a different kind of conditions. We have winter conditions. And now the purple here is if we have those winter conditions and we have any amount of runoff occurring, then we flip that grid cell to be purple. And that's also just to kind of be very conservative with telling people, we have conditions where runoff could be occurring on frozen conditions. Now, it's important to note that we currently have the model set up to flip to severe, what they call it here, if any amount of runoff is occurring, tiniest amount. And that's something we can dial back with feedback. I think maybe right now, personally, I think it's a little aggressive, and I think we should probably dampen out a little bit of that. But it's up to the state to decide. It's up to the what their users want to tell them on how they want that. Do you really want a cautious appearance, or do you want to pull back? You don't want to overwarn in that sense. So also, the map is great spatially for the big picture, but if you keep zooming in, eventually you'll see a grid cells where you can click on each grid cell and you get a pop-up box. And this will show you information for the next 5 to 10 days for that specific grid cell. Here it shows you the risk actually for 10 days, and then it shows you 5 days worth of precip, air temp, and soil conditions and the snow conditions for that specific grid cell. And so it's telling you at the top here that the highest risk in the next 10 days is that severe or purple. And because today, which would be day 2 yesterday, we're supposed to warm up and get a little bit of runoff occurring. And then after that, it's getting cold and it's locked back down. So I personally feel like these pop-up boxes are the key to understanding this tool. So you see the map, but to really understand what's going on, you kind of have to dig in and see what these pop-ups are telling you. And this is a Wisconsin tool. It's so a similar situation, similar setup. Just a little different, it just looks a little different. And then when you zoom in on a Wisconsin tool instead of text, they have like a more graphical interface, but it's similar information here. So again, the pop-up boxes are really the key to try to dig into why is it telling us it's a high risk or low risk or something like that. Okay, so probably getting close to my time, so I have a few more slides. Here's just a summary. So as I mentioned, risk for this is dominated by the runoff magnitude. Higher the magnitude, the higher the risk. We do that for a couple of reasons. The edge of field data shows us that the bigger events are really what we want to draw attention to, and we don't want to apply freshly applied nutrients right before those. And then we're just more confident with the model skill for the larger events than we are a lot of these smaller events. It's important to note that we're not doing any water quality modeling. This is strictly water quantity. These are dominated by the weather models. So if the weather model is going to have a miss, it's more likely that this tool will have a miss. We can't account for any kind of local conditions. So if you have cover crops, maybe that reduces your risk. Where if you just went out and applied liquid manure and affected your soil moisture, maybe you've elevated your risk. So that's the user is going to have to take that into account. But really, these are just dynamic tools that are trying to incorporate all the factors producers and farmers are already thinking about, but it's kind of packages them together as another backup perspective. With all that uncertainty involved, these are not meant to ever be regulatory. This is just another type of information that can be used in that decision-making process. Next steps, just quickly, well, I guess it's a couple years now. In 2019, we kicked off version 3. So we'd like to keep this project moving and jump to a newer model finer resolution. That work's ongoing. It probably won't be available to the public until 4 to 5 years from now. Just real quick to hit this. So social science, a couple of years ago, actually before version 2 was released, we had some social science work done. And the bottom line here is that when we interviewed farmers and they did surveys, weather's number one. It's very important. They want the best information they can get. They understand they're under the microscope. And when they were introduced to this tool, they became more, they were pretty positive about it. So the more that we get out there and introduce this and explain to them how it can be used, I think we'll get more usage in the future. And so just summary, last slide here. Again, this is a real-time decision support tool for producers. And we're really trying to avoid losing any freshly applied nutrients. This isn't gonna apply to the legacy amount. This amount is already in soil. That's already gonna move. We just don't wanna make any issues worse. We're kind of promoting, expanding on that right time message. These are state-owned tools. It's Weather Service modeling, but there's working groups in each state to help decide how these tools behave and act, and they're in charge of all the communication and outreach. And I think it's important to for users to understand the expectations and the strengths and limitations of these tools, where they can be beneficial, where they're not going to be as useful. And I think with the long term, modeling is going to continue to get better as we continue to move to version 3, and that will also improve. But we can kind of start this conversation and get the point about application timing and the importance of that out there now with this tool, and then let it continually evolve. So that was it. Sorry about the little mess up there in the beginning. Hopefully it wasn't too bad.
Perfect, Dustin. Yeah, I think I was the source of that screw up earlier, so I'll take
Usually it's me.
full responsibility. But we have one question here. What are the scale of the grids in the current model?
Okay, so the current model, the native model is a 4 kilometer by 4 kilometer grid. However, when we produce the final output that we provide to the states, we do a downscaling when we have to reproject it and convert it to a geotiff for the states to put it in the websites. So what you see on the websites is a 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer grid. But,
okay.
But the native model is 4 kilometer. So we just do a little downscaling.
Sounds good. I had one user question. If I'm looking at using this, how do I find it? Can you just Google runoff risk advisory in your state?
Yeah, if you go to runoffrisk.info, that's a website, there'll be a link to each one of those.
Okay.
Or if you type in Wisconsin runoff risk or Minnesota, you will probably get there by Google as well. But
Sure.
That little landing page that Wisconsin actually set up is pretty slick.
Sure. And is it mobile friendly in terms of using the tool? Can you use it from your phone?
Yeah, so those are questions that the states have to deal with. I believe there are mobile websites in Wisconsin. I'm not sure about Minnesota. I could look into that one. And so every state has a little different thing. I think Minnesota does have a text alert. I know with Michigan certainly does have a text alert where you can get text every day for the information. So each state has a little different approach to how they get that data out there.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Dustin.
Yep.
If anybody has further questions for Dustin, he will be on till the end of the meeting. Oh, here comes another one. Have you considered adding distance to nearest receiving waters into the model? I'm thinking fields close to waters present a greater risk.
No, that isn't something that we would be able to do with the model that we're using now. But that could be something that could be overlaid, I think, maybe on the websites. You know, the states could maybe help do that. So that's a little outside the scope of the current modeling.
Sure. All right. Well, thanks, Dustin.
Yep.
Up next, we have George Schwent from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency.
Hello, everyone. My name is George Schwent. I'm the principal engineer for the feedlot program here in the state of Minnesota for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. I will throw my presentation up on the screen and share that.
Perfect. I can see it fine.
All right, good. So I'm going to give you today a little overview on the regulations in Minnesota specific to land application and manure management. In the presentation, you'll see a few QR codes. I think you're kind of all familiar with those, but if you want to have more information about a specific topic I'm talking about or the actual form I'm going to show you, you can scan that QR code with your phone and then be taken right to our website. So in Minnesota, the regulations for land application are really broken up into 3 thresholds. Minnesota still uses animal units relating to how much manure can be expected production from a different type of animal. So a beef steer is 1 animal unit in Minnesota. Finishing pig is 0.3 animal units. So it takes about 3 finishing pigs to equal 1 beef steer. I think we're all familiar with that, that concept of animal units. The thresholds for land application are broken up into 3 different levels. We have 1,000 animal units, 300 animal units, and 100 animal units. Those 1,000 animal units are our bigger sites, our operating permits, our NPDS permits, and our state disposal system permits, their operating permits. The rest of them are for smaller sites. So just kind of keep this in mind as we go through the presentation, these different thresholds, 1,000, 300, and 100 animal units. So the basic premise of the land application rules in Minnesota is to avoid pollution to waters of the state. Seems like a very good goal. At its most basic requirement is we don't want to have a discharge during the land application of manure process. So this photo here of applying this gigantic rainstorm, this may not be the best time to apply manure and avoid a discharge. We would not want to be applying manure at this time. As far as the regulations in Minnesota go, there are things that everybody needs to do, things that a lot of people need to do, and things that just a few or some people will need to do. So in Minnesota, everyone will need to apply manure at agronomic rates based on the crop needs. Everyone will also need to observe setbacks to water features. The state rules, at least on the state level, county level may be a little different. There are no setbacks to churches, cities, residences. None of that is regulated by the state of Minnesota. It's all local control based on each county or maybe even a township. So our setbacks are just to waters. Most people that apply manure will need to test their manure for nutrient content and then keep records of those applications that they're going to be doing. And some people will also need to test and manage field soil phosphorus and develop a manure management plan or MMP. So let's talk about the MMP portion of it first and who needs a plan. All feedlots of 1,000 animal units or more do need an MMP. Many feedlots in that 300 to 1,000 animal unit category will need MMPs. Just a few less than 300 animal units, and then none less than 100 animal units need MMPs. One thing to keep in mind is if you're applying for a permit from the MPCA, whether it's the operating permit for those larger sites or some of our construction permits for those kind of in-between sites at 300 to 1,000 animal unit site. If you're getting a permit from us, you are going to have to develop and maintain a MMP as part of that application. The MPCA has a free tool. I think it's the greatest thing ever since I developed and maintain it to help you develop an MMP. It's on our website. It's an Excel-based spreadsheet to help you develop this quickly and make an understandable document for you. Manure nutrient testing. Any feedlot that has 100 animal units or more needs to test their manure. They need to test it at least every 4 years, or if they're going to have a change in their operation that might affect nutrients. So they're going to put a solid separator in or change from a straw or sawdust bedding to a sand bedding in a dairy system will change nutrient content potentially. Those are also times you want to sample your manure, make sure you're catching those changes and reflecting your nutrient content of your manure. Additionally, if you're a brand new facility just starting out or just starting to test for the first time, we want you to test for the first 3 years. That's required for over 300 animal units, just to get a good baseline of what you can expect from your operation and what you can expect for nutrients to be applied to your crop fields. The rules in Minnesota are mainly nitrogen based. There are some phosphorus restrictions as well we'll cover later, but the main focus is nitrogen. And these nitrogen-based restrictions apply everywhere manure is spread, no matter if you have an MMP, if you have 1 horse, if you have 2,000, 4,000 pigs, wherever manure is spread, nitrogen-based rules apply. These are you cannot exceed the nitrogen needs of the crop or removal for legumes for your soybeans or alfalfa crops. We want you only applying as much nitrogen as that crop actually needs or could use. We want you to follow the University of Minnesota recommendations. And we also want you to account for all the different sources of N that could be contributing to for the N needs of that crop, whether that's from your manure application, it could be a fertilizer application, including any starter fertilizer that they're using, any N from past legumes. So if you're getting any credits from your soybean crop or alfalfa crop that you've grown previously. And also if you are irrigating in Minnesota, you may be getting some N from the nitrates in that groundwater as well that you should be accounting for. So make sure you're accounting for all those sources of nitrogen. Now, here's a table of the most common crop that manure is applied to or nitrogen applied to in Minnesota. That's corn. This is based on the University of Minnesota MRTN, their recommendations. So if you have a corn crop following a soybean crop, the first line there, the maximum amount of nitrogen you can apply is 150 pounds of nitrogen from all sources. So total up your manure, your fertilizer, and anything else. 150 is the max. If it's corn on corn, it's 195 pounds of N. You can see if you got some alfalfa in the rotation, then that alfalfa is contributing some N to that corn crop, and the rates are reduced accordingly. Now, for those that may not need an MMP or just want to have a quick guide to help them calculate some nitrogen-based rates, we have a very handy guide that's on the web there. You can scan the QR code or you can get it in print. It's called the Manure Application Rate Guide. It's pocket-sized, very concise, and actually will have all this information I'm going to talk about today in this little publication. One of the nicest things is we have application rate charts in there for different types of manure and different methods of application. So for this particular example on the screen here, we have a broadcast solid dairy manure. He's going to incorporate within 12 hours. If he wants to figure out what rate to apply at, simply go to the N test from your manure test. In this case, they have 18 pounds highlighted. And if he wants to get 150 pounds of nitrogen, those two lines intersect is the application rate, so 15 tons per acre. It's an easy, quick way to help calculate an application rate on the fly. We do also have the Minnesota requirements for soil phosphorus testing, and that's required every 4 years if you're applying manure from a feedlot with 300 or more animal units. It also applies if you are any size facility and applying manure within 300 feet of waters at a rate or frequency that might build your soil phosphorus. That's far less common. The most common is that first bullet there, where if you're over 300 animal units, you need to test your fields for soil phosphorus every 4 years. The phosphorus requirements are not as prevalent in the rule as the nitrogen-based requirements are, but they are there. Those requirements focus on distance to waters. When you're further away from the waters, in this picture here, the far right arrow is pointing to land away from this particular intermittent stream. Requirements for phosphorus control start at 150 parts per million Bray or 120 Olson. If you're close to that water body within 300 feet, it's much, much lower. It's 22 or 17 for Olson. So the distance to waters really affects those phosphorus requirements. And in general, when we're looking at the requirements that are out there, when you get to that close to that water feature, we want to make sure we're not building soil phosphorus over a 6-year period is the general requirement that happens in there. Making sure you're getting that phosphorus removed by your crops so it doesn't run off into the stream or other water body. We also have setbacks to water features that apply to anyone applying manure. In general, if you're not going to inject or incorporate your manure within 24 hours, you're going to be observing a 300-foot setback to all water features, including tile intakes, sinkholes, lakes, rivers, streams, all those. If you are going to incorporate or inject, you can apply in that 300-foot zone, but you may have to still observe a 25-foot setback to water features, a 50-foot setback to a well. You can kind of see the graphic here. Interesting to note that if you are applying near an open tile intake and you're injecting, there is no setback to that open tile intake. Road ditches in Minnesota, you cannot apply manure directly into a road ditch, even if you want to harvest it for ditch hay. help that grass grow a little better. No, you cannot apply manure into that road ditch. Another thing to note, especially in southeast Minnesota, where we have more topography and more intermittent streams, sometimes those road ditches are mapped as intermittent streams. If that's the case, you need to follow the rules for intermittent streams, not treat it as a road ditch. This picture here on the screen, if that road ditch is mapped as an intermittent stream and you want to apply manure to that field right there and not incorporate, you need to stay 300 feet away from that road ditch. So it can be kind of confusing and kind of hard to discern what needs to be followed. So make sure you check before you go out and start land applying manure. What about winter application? That's a common question we get is, can I apply manure in the winter in Minnesota? The answer is generally yes, if you're one of those smaller sites. If you're a larger site, there are some additional restrictions, and we'll go over those later. But for anyone that's applying manure in Minnesota in the winter, by anyone, commercial applicator, you're applying it yourself, you happen to have 4 or 5 horses, or you got thousands of pigs. If you're going to apply in the winter, you cannot apply manure within 300 feet of lakes, rivers, streams, open tile intakes, sinkholes. Again, the setbacks chart showed before, we can't incorporate them, so we need to observe a 300-foot setback to those features. Now, there are some additional requirements for NPDS and SDS permits, so our larger sites that have those operating permits. These are not going to apply to the smaller sites, but I want to make you aware of what the larger sites are also required to do. So if you have one of these permits, you are required to do annual manure nutrient testing. Before it was every 4 years. Well, now it's annual for these larger sites. You also are required to delay your application to coarse textured soils. So anything that's really sandy, we want you to wait until the soil temperature is 50 degrees or less to limit the conversion of nitrogen to nitrate that could be occurring from the natural soil bacteria. As far as winter applications go, we actually define winter in our permits, and that means frozen or snow-covered soils after November 30th. So if we get an early snowfall or an early freeze-up, we don't consider that winter application yet. We need to put a date on there to provide some certainty to farmers of for planning purposes go. Make sure that they know that they can at least apply in the month of November for sure. What those restrictions are for those NPDS and SDS permits are no application of liquid manure in the winter. There are some emergency provisions, obviously, but in general, no liquid application for these larger sites in the winter. Solid manure is generally still allowed, but there are some field and weather specific requirements to limit runoff. We want to make sure we're applying to low sloping fields and when there's not an imminent threat of rainfall or snow melt going to be occurring. Now, as you may or may not be aware, we have a new NPDS permit. It's just going to go into effect on February 1st. So 2 weeks from now, we'll have a new permit effective for the NPDS permits. So this also includes some additional restrictions on land application measures. So anybody that's going to get this new permit, which is going to really affect next crop year, so 2022, by the time we actually get coverage under this permit, they're going to be required to do cover crops for any September application. Right now, our rule requires June, July, and August needs cover crops. We're going to add September to that list. If you are applying manure in October, if it's before October 15th, you're going to need to do a nitrogen BMP. We give you 4 options. You can do cover crops like you did in September, or you can make sure the soil temperature is 50 degrees or less. Sometimes that happens early in October. You could split your application so that half is applied now and half is applied at a later time, or you could use some nitrification inhibitors that will get you time until that soil temperature drops below that 50-degree Fahrenheit number. So again, October 15th, before that, you need to do some nitrogen BMPs if you're one of these larger sites. As far as winter application goes, we're going to prohibit application of solid manure in March. Liquids already prohibited for the entire winter application, winter season. We're now going to prohibit winter application of solid manure in March. We are going to allow it during the month of February, but we're going to have some additional restrictions, on even less slope on those fields, more protection. So 2% or less on the slope, And we don't want any rainfall or snow melt expected within 5 days. So again, these are coming forward, just going to go into effect February 1st, but a lot of this won't take effect until next calendar year, obviously. So there is also a requirement to keep records of what you do for land application in Minnesota. I'll run through those very briefly. So who must keep records? Any farm with 100 or more animal units has to keep records of manure application practices. Or if you are getting manure from somebody that has 100 animal units, you also need to keep records of your practices. You're required to keep those records for at least 3 years. In the event we have a question on your application practices, we can look at those records. Or if you're applying in special protection areas or have an NPDS permit, you are required to keep those for 6 years. What needs to be recorded depends on your size. If you are under 300 but over 100, so that's really kind of small category, you're required to keep enough information to look at the nitrogen credits for that application. Where did you go with it? How much you put on? How much nitrogen is available this year and next year? Those are the basics. If you're over 300 animal units, you need to keep a little more information, specifically phosphorus information. That's the level at which you need to start doing your soil phosphorus testing. So a little more information required for those folks. We have a form. Here's a form for 300 plus animal units. Pretty busy, but it's at least all the information on one page, keeping track of your manure nutrient test results, your field information, your soil information, what crop you grew, how much you applied, and then how much N and P came from that application. Last slide I think I have here is just a few more resources that you can check out. We have our land application webpage. We have a manure application rate guide. I showed you that little picture before. That's a really handy tool to assist farmers in calculating rates. We have a publication on the maximum nitrogen rates for corn production in Minnesota, what those maximum rates are. And then we have a document on sensitive areas, a document on setbacks to water features. A lot of good information that publication as well. So 4 good publications you can check out at your leisure. With that, that's the basics of my presentation.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, George. We have a few questions. Manure application setback apply to alternative tile intakes like a blind rock inlet?
Yes, they do. The only one it does not apply to is a pattern tile situation. If it's a French drain or rock inlet, that 300-foot setback still does apply.
Still does apply, okay. Next question, how soon before manure application in September do cover crops need to be planted for that new permit?
Okay, so the cover crop requirement in September would be just for the larger sites again. That could either be interseeded cover crop. So before you harvest your primary crop, you could interseed and then apply manure into that standing cover crop. Or we want you to apply plant your cover crop within 14 days of manure application. So we give you 14 days to get out there and get that cover crop planted.
Great. Your presentation referenced the term public wetland multiple times. How are these wetlands defined? Like, for example, are they all mapped?
Yes, there is a map. The DNR maintains this map. I don't think it's like a GIS layer you can download. It's county by county basis. And they have all the wetlands marked on there, whether they're protected or not protected. So you have to look at the map from the DNR.
Okay. And last, how often are compliance checks completed for NPDS permitted farms by state agency?
The goal we have is to inspect our NPDS permits once every 5 years or twice every 5 years, depending on the type of facility and type of permit they have. SDS or NPDS obviously is a little different. So once or twice in every 5 years period is what we're looking at.
One more question came in. How long has the nitrification inhibitor allowance been in place? And I think it's not in place yet.
It's going to take effect here February 1st. So it's a relatively new requirement, or not even a requirement, it's an option for those that are applying manure in October 1st to the 15th. It's one of the 4 BMPs that they can choose from. So it's not required, but it is an option.
Yep. And I think the question goes on to talk about nitrification in the spring. I think the primary purpose of that in the fall is to prevent the nitrification in the fall.
That's correct.
Into winter, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And then how will the cover crop requirement be handled? Is it pulled at random? I'm not sure what that's referencing. Maybe Megan can clarify your question, and if you could respond to that in chat, we'll get to our next presentation so we don't run out of time.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, George. That was excellent. Up next, we're going to move into Wisconsin. Paul Daigle from Matathaon County and works for the Wisconsin Conservation Planning and Zoning. So Paul, if you could turn on your video and mic, and we'll get your screen shared and get you going.
We can do that.
Awesome.
So good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to thanks to everyone for inviting me to this to start with. And I am the Land and Water Program Director in Matathaon County, and I've been in this business for 35 years and have a great awareness of what happens at the county level and a more general awareness how manure is regulated at the state and federal levels. And really, that was the question asked of me: how is manure regulated in Wisconsin, and where to find what rules apply to me? And George did a great job of being pretty specific on Minnesota, and I'm probably going to bring you to a little higher elevation and keep things a little more general, and if I can. And so I'm going to start by sharing a PowerPoint. Looks like it's sharing on one page. Are you just seeing an email, basically?
I am seeing just your PowerPoint application.
Oh,
If you went into the presentation mode, I think it would work.
okay. All right, got it. Yep. It looked like I was looking at an email. So, all right. So then you should have it from the beginning, if that works.
Perfect. Yep, I can see the slide.
All right. So again, how is manure regulated in Wisconsin? And I'm going to get into more of the general rules instead of specific spreading requirements and things like that, because they do vary by quite a bit. But before we ask how it's regulated, it's more important to discuss really the why. And I think if anyone realizes that I'm a soil scientist, I mean the importance of using livestock manures to enhance soil health and grow beautiful, abundant crops, and apply it at the right time, at the right amount, and in the right location. It is the #1 source of fertilizer. And on a lot of farms, we work with almost the sole source of fertilizer. If they have access to abundant livestock manures. And, and because it is such a rich source of nutrients that, if not properly managed, I think we all know, some of the serious and dire outcomes that can come if it reaches our surface or groundwaters. And just to bring a reference into play, I'm just completing our land and water plan for Matathaon County, a 10-year plan. And we still are blessed with many dairy farms here. And it occupies about, the dairy operations, about 40% of the 1 million acre land base in the county. Yet, when we look at the sources of phosphorus into our surface waters, over 80% of the phosphorus is tracked back to those dairy operations. So that's the why it's so important that we manage these nutrients properly and protect our surface water, because we all know how vital they are to recreation, and our groundwater, how vital they are to keep our businesses going and our private residences' wells so that folks have healthy water to drink each day and use in their businesses, including agriculture. So let's look at the federal regulations just real quick, and I don't want to repeat too much of what George said. And but in Wisconsin, the federal regulations are, and all that authority is passed on to the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. And we just have a new planner that started here a couple of years ago, and he's from Ohio. And in Ohio, the EPA does all of this work. So it's each state can vary greatly. And so I don't know if all our participants are from Wisconsin and Minnesota, but those can change state by state, depending on who has authority. But in Wisconsin, again, those CAFOs, we call them, like they're concentrated feeding operations. Those are farms over 1,000 animal units. So roughly, if you have 500 cows and replacement heifers, you're going to be approaching that number, and your radar should be on. If, in addition, we have 2 of these in the county that are probably going to be licensed, and those are farms with over 300 animal units, so about 200 cows and replacements, and up to 1,000 animal units. But these farms, if they had significant discharges to the waters of the state, they can be asked by the state to, or be required by the state to get a Wisconsin Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit. And the permitting process takes a bit, but if you're in either one of those categories, you should be seeking assistance from the Wisconsin DNR before you're approaching those numbers. So, you plan for the future and your farm's growth. And if you just go to Wisconsin DNR and just look at CAFO permits, there's a vast array of information on what you need to do. It's really a pretty high quality site on what farmers need to know from a CAFO standpoint. So in the state of Wisconsin, for farms, this applies to all CAFOs, but that'll be part of the permit process. But these are really the rules that every farmer in Wisconsin should follow. They're really common sense rules that were put in place after an Animal Waste Advisory Committee in the late 1990s put these in place, and they got passed in the early 2000s. But obviously, no overflow of manure storage facilities, no unconfined manure piles in a water quality management area. So what's a water quality management area? So that's 300 feet from a perennial stream and 1,000 feet from any lake or reservoir. In addition, no direct runoff from feedlots or stored manure into the state waters. And lastly, no unconfined, unlimited livestock access to waters of the state in locations where high concentrations of animals prevent the maintenance of adequate or self-sustaining vegetative cover. So those are in state law. Depending on where you are, some counties have incorporated right into local animal waste management ordinances. Each county might have the verbiage a little bit different, but generally if they're under animal waste, if you look at county ordinances. But if the county does not have these in place, and it's an option, the DNR has full authority to enforce these on any farm in Wisconsin. The caveat is if you have to take action and it's going to cost money, there is a requirement that cost sharing is offered to correct any of the prohibitions that are in place.
Hey, Paul,
Yep.
this is Tim. Could you speak up a little bit? A few people are having trouble hearing.
Okay, sure. Is that any better?
Yeah, I think maybe either get a little closer or talk a bit
I'm trying to scoot a little closer to the microphone here. So
Perfect, thank you.
yeah, so we're so did I need to repeat anything back?
No, I think you can just continue going. I could
Okay.
hear you. It was just a little quieter.
All right,
That's all.
sounds good. All right, so these are really I provided a link on where to find something. These information on Wisconsin runoff rules and what every farmer needs to know. And it's just a helpful page and provides some of the additional performance standards that are required of all farmers, but I provided the ones that were directly related to livestock manure, and that's you asked me today. The other one is so what flows down to the counties, and that's really where I've been working again for most of my career is county animal waste rules. And first thing everyone needs to understand is that the counties are extension of the state, and all of our authority comes from the state. Cities and villages are slightly different. They have what's called home rule, and their authority, unless taken away from the state, is they have the authority to regulate much more than counties. So unless the counties give an express authority to regulate something, we can't exceed any of the state requirements unless given permission. An example would be that, let's just say Matathaon County's got a high quality lake and they want to put restrictions in that would require something above state performance standards from farmers that their land drains into that lake's watershed. We would have to seek permission from the state to do something like that. We do not have authority to just simply put those things in place. The other thing is where you're going to find most of any animal regulations is these in Matathaon counties, it's an animal waste storage and management ordinance. And again, most of the counties that have any type of concentration of livestock has ordinance in place for the most part. County animal waste rules, they strengthen, and the strength and enforcement varies greatly by county. There's a lot of counties that have some minimum information and requirements of farmers that have livestock manure. And almost all of them that I've seen include a requirement to get permits for any type of construction, modification, and abandonment. And again, what was covered already quite a bit was the nutrient management aspect. And I'm not going to go into depth on that at all, but just to understand that if you have any type of storage facility, what comes with that is an obligation to have a nutrient management plan in place and follow that plan. And then the other thing that, and this varies widely from county, is that possibly some or all of those state performance standards that I've mentioned are and could be included in those ordinances. Matathaon County has incorporated all of those agricultural performance standards and prohibitions last year into our ordinance. And but to really find out more, you can visit your county land conservation office, and I would suggest doing that virtually first because most of their information is provided on websites. And but certainly, call your local land conservation office. It's much better to preempt any of these things rather than begin construction and find out what you want to do might not really be a good fit with some of those ordinances. And we're really trying to protect groundwater and surface water and also manage those facilities. And when you think of it, just a 100 cow dairy, which is about the average now in Wisconsin, they generate over 1 million gallons of liquid manure. And with that comes great responsibility to manage it properly. And the other thing is counties are going to be a resource to steer you towards possibly free engineering assistance and any cost sharing assistance. We partner with our federal partners in voluntary conservation. That would be the Natural Resources Conservation Service. But on a local level, your land conservation department is going to be your best first resource to really take a look at those things. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to you and see if there's any questions of me. And I hope I addressed the questions that were given to me. So,
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Paul. As we're getting close to 1 o'clock, I'm going to have Erica put up our CCA info. So if people got other meetings they need to get to, they could get entered in on that with the QR code. If you don't use the codes, please put your name and number in the chat box, and we'll get you recorded and sent in. And Erica's putting up the poll too, so if you had a chance to vote on that, that would be helpful as well. Paul, I don't see any questions coming in. So thanks for your information. People have a good start on where to look if you're looking to get into manure regulations.
Hey, Paul.
So with that, I'll wrap up the meeting. Thank you to Dustin, Paul, and George.
Hey, Tim,
What?
I think Erica had a question.
Yeah, could you just post that link to the publication in the chat, Paul? To the
Yeah, I'll see if I can do that.
great, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, again, thank you to all the speakers. Some great information was presented today. If you're interested in viewing this recording later, it'll be up on our Facebook pages, at our Wisconsin Discovery Farms Facebook page, and also the Minnesota Agricultural Water Resource Center Facebook page, and on our YouTube Minnesota Agricultural Water Resource Center YouTube page. You can find all the recordings from this webinar and previous webinars as part of the series. Next week, January 27th, back our regular time, same place, Zoom. We're going to be talking about applying skills we've learned. And this last webinar in this series will help us apply some of the topics discussed in previous webinars to farm management. 3 lightning talks will kick off the webinar, followed by discussion rooms. Prepare to share and participate your experiences in the webinar. So next week we have Erica Gentry talking about managing your manure, Matt Ruark talking about NUE studies, which is nitrogen use efficiency studies, and then Tim Griffiths talking about carbon market potential. So thank you all for joining, and we hope to see you next week.